Good afternoon and welcome to the webinar. We appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us. This webinar is produced by the Child Parent Institute in partnership with the CATTA Center, a project of the Center for Innovation and Resources, and the Greater Bay Area Child Abuse Prevention Council Coalition. Before we begin, I just want to cover a few housekeeping items. For those of you who can hear me, this might seem obvious, but to anyone who may have their sound turned off or muted, this is a visual reminder that you must turn on your sound to hear the presentation. If you would like to utilize closed captioning in this webinar, please click the CC button at the bottom of your Zoom webinar screen. Use the Q&A feature to ask the presenter any questions that you may have. We will reserve the last 30 minutes for Q&A. The chat panel is where you can ask tech support questions. We will respond to the support questions as soon as possible. We are offering CEUs for this webinar to MFTs and LCSWs. At the end of the course, you'll be prompted to complete an evaluation and CEU application in order to receive those CEUs. If you would like to donate to support this speaker series, you can scan the QR code that you see on the screen here, or text family to 855-473-2800, or I will also be putting a link that you can click on in the chat panel once the presentation gets started. And now I'd like to introduce our presenter. Erin Runnion is the mother of Samantha Runnion and the founding director of the Joyful Child Foundation. Erin works to honor Samantha's joy and courage by uniting communities to protect and empower every child to be brave and stay safe. In addition to her role with the Joyful Child Foundation, Erin produces a podcast called Let's Talk Joy, inspired by her first book, which is pending publication. She also serves on the California Child Abduction Task Force and the California Children's Justice Act Task Force under the Governor's Office of Emergency Services. Her honors include a Certificate of Valor from the Department of Justice, People Magazine's 2004 Heroes Among Us Award, and commendations from the California State Assembly. Now, please bear with me a moment as I switch controls over to Erin.
Hello, thank you all for being here. Just waiting to be able to share my screen. There we go. I am always humbled that you folks take time out of their day to spend this time with me, and I really appreciate your interest in our efforts to protect children and looking at those who have registered for participation today. I am humbled by how many of you are professionals yourselves and dedicating your careers to protecting and empowering our children. So thank you again for inviting me to be here today, and I'm very excited about sharing my story and sharing what I have learned over the last 18 years. I started the Joyful Child Foundation in 2002, just 6 weeks after my daughter Samantha was abducted. She was playing outside with her best friend when a car pulled around. A man got out and asked Samantha and her friend if they would help him find his lost puppy. And then he rushed at Samantha, grabbed her. She had the presence of mind to yell to her friend, "Go tell my grandma," as he threw her in the car. And she was found the very next day, having been sexually assaulted and murdered. It was 11 days before Samantha would have turned 6 years old. And in the aftermath, I had to have some context for what had just happened. I thought stranger abductions were more rare than my chances of winning the lottery. And that set me on a journey, a learning adventure into the spectrum and scope of crimes against children. And I just wanted so desperately to ensure that her suffering and loss was not in vain, that she would continue to inspire people. And that's why we started the Joyful Child, to unite our families and communities in the prevention of crimes against children, to educate and empower and unite families and communities to stop these crimes from ever happening again. And that has been my focus for the last 18 years, is what works, what doesn't, and how can we effectively move the needle and stop cruelty to children. To give you some context, when Samantha was taken, I was a young mom and we were a blended family. So Samantha was my only biological child, and Paige and Connor were both from my husband's first marriage. We had been together for just about 3 years when Samantha was taken, but that last year was the first year that we had full custody, and it was the first year that they all got to go to school together. Connor had just turned 5, and they really had come to a place where they belonged. They kind of found their space and their place amongst each other and within our new family. And having her suddenly ripped out of all of our lives, I remember very clearly saying to people that it was her little brother, Connor, who had the most significant trauma in that aftermath because of his age and because of all of the instability of divorce and separation, and their mother lived in another state at this point. And I will share with you all as we go through this, just, it seems like when something horrific happens to you, you should get out of a trauma for life card for free, right? You're never going to have to go through anything so awful again. And life doesn't work that way. And I think for a lot of folks, based on the questions I was hearing, what we're facing today is a lot of fear about what's going to happen next. Could something yet more awful be on the horizon? And I hope to help you navigate that a little bit for yourselves, for the children that you serve, or for those of you who are parents, for your children. I often give credit to the first responders, the law enforcement officers, the folks at the DA's office, from the prosecution to the victim advocates, to those who still serve as victim advocates through the appellate process, because my family received such an incredible level of compassionate professionalism from the very first day of the investigation all throughout the trial. And without that, I don't know that I would have had the strength to continue in the way that I did. I don't know that I would have been able to find hope and see the potential for Samantha's story to continue to inspire people to be proactive about child protection. So thank you again for the work that you do every day, because sometimes you don't realize the impact that you're making. And I hope that after today, you will take heart that you are making a difference, even when you can't be there and present in the way that you wish that you could always. So our objectives today, as we go into this presentation, given where we are, I am not giving my normal presentation. This is an entirely new presentation for me, because the world is a different place right now. And whereas I normally am very direct about the spectrum of crimes against children, and particularly preventing predatory crimes against children, none of us need to hear one more thing about the problems we're facing. And so we're going to really focus on what we can realistically do right now in our current reality to better protect our children now and moving forward, even after this pandemic. So I will briefly, just so that we're all on the same page for some context, go over the scope and impact of childhood trauma. Then I'm going to talk and really focus on strategies that have proven to improve outcomes for children and teens. And I will use as an example, there were some questions that you all submitted prior to today regarding internet safety in particular, given how much time our young people are spending online. So I will use that as an example of ways that we can integrate some of those strategies that we know work in helping children cope and heal. So on top of the pandemic and no one, right? No one. We never could have imagined that we would still be in this situation. And I think that this week we're all having a collective almost grief over going backwards again as a state. And as if that wasn't enough, we had the election and the civil unrest. And we are, I believe, for the first time in my life, going through a worldwide sort of collective or experience of what the phenomena that social psychologists call the collective subconscious. As a human population, we are all in the same storm. We're obviously not in the same boat. We're all going through very different things, but we're also experiencing this underlying current of uncertainty. It's very distressing. It's very unnerving. And for those of us who do serve children, we know that sadly, a lot of our most vulnerable children are not safe at home. And so this whole situation has those of us who already know a lot about crimes against children even more worried, even more stressed and anxious about what the children that we care for are going through. But we also have to take a step back and recognize that given these circumstances, given where we are over 8 months into this pandemic, we are all vulnerable. When you look at the risk factors associated with child abuse, interpersonal violence, substance abuse, the primary factors beyond a past history, right, and mental health issues pre-existing, social isolation. When we are isolated, we are inherently more vulnerable to all forms of abuse, whether perpetrated by someone else or ourselves upon ourselves. Stress, again, we're all experiencing it in different ways, but everyone is under more stress and a different kind of stress than ever before, and in an entirely new way. If we came into this pandemic without having connection and solid communication with our loved ones, with our colleagues, that adds to all of the stress that we're experiencing collectively. So one of the things that we know from trauma-informed practices, which I'll talk about in a little bit, is that when we're going to talk about something that is difficult, and initially, as I mentioned, I am going to talk a little bit about crimes against children, it helps to have that warning. It helps when we let folks know that we're going to talk about something difficult, we're going to do something hard, and this is why, and then we're going to come out of it on the other side, and we're going to talk about the positives, what we can learn from this, the opportunities that this has presented to us. And by giving ourselves that moment to acknowledge that this is hard, we can actually help mitigate our own trauma, as well as mitigate the trauma for those who may be listening or participating. So I'm going to invite you, because I think we all need it. I know I do. Let's take a breath. Just breathe. Just rest your eyes for a moment. You've probably been Zooming all day. Breathe in. Slowly breathe out. If you can plant your feet firmly on the ground, notice how they feel. Sometimes it helps to put your hand on your belly. That's what we do with children. You can put your hand on your heart and feel your pulse. Feel your heartbeat. Connects you to the ground, connects you to right now, and take another deep breath. You can count to 4 on the inhale and then 4 on the exhale. There are lots of different strategies, but focusing on your breath is one quick way that is universally accessible to all of us, to remind us of being in this moment right now. because in this moment right now is where we can find hope. Right now, we're okay. Right now is workable. That's the more that we connect with our strength in this moment and the next, the more we develop resilience for the next challenge. We know that we will see that through too. And the more that we can have confidence in our ability to see through the next challenge, the more open we are to actually be able to appreciate where we are now, what we have now, and find joy in the lives that we are living. And that's why Samantha's legacy is called The Joyful Child, because as hard as this is, what I really want all of the caring adults in the world to think about is protecting their joy. It's not just about protecting their physical bodies. It's about giving them the tools to safely navigate their world so that they can experience joy. So out of the gate, I left, this is from my normal presentation, and I left it in here because with so many of you being professionals, I just want to make it clear that with our parent presentations, we really do focus a lot on emphasizing that although Samantha's abduction was a stranger abduction, that accounts for less than 1% of all child abductions. So when you look at the broad spectrum of child maltreatment and child cruelty and those that rise to the level that we call them crimes, what happened to my daughter is literally on the most extreme end of that spectrum. It was a stranger, and she was assaulted and murdered, and she was very young, okay? But over 90% of crimes against children are perpetrated by somebody the child and their family know and trust. 30 to 60%, depending on the specific abuse, is perpetrated by a family member of that child. And that's why we know that many of our most vulnerable children are even at a greater risk in this isolation at home. And that is something that as providers, we have to take care of ourselves in terms of our own worries and projections and how that is impacting our ability to actually serve. And of course, children with special needs are significantly, again, that varies from 3 times more likely to 9 times more likely, depending on the specific crime against a child. But those with special needs are even more vulnerable to abuse in all its forms. So when we think about, crimes against children, cruelty to children, there are many different forms. And over the last 25 years, researchers have made enormous progress in helping us to understand the impact of different kinds of child trauma. And this is a brain scan. So in the brain science field, they have done a ton of research. And this is an old scan that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. But this is, it so very clearly illustrates the impact of childhood trauma. These are 2 3-year-olds, a scan of their brains. And on the one side, you have the healthy brain, where you see all of those portions of the brain lit up. And on the other side, you see an abused child and how that has impacted those pathways in their brain. And the way that the brain develops, it is from, to borrow Dr. Gelsey's hand brain, from the brain stem, from the spinal cord up into the brain stem. That's kind of our reptilian brain. That's where we have involuntary responses to breathe when we're born, to know when we're hungry, to feel pain, our need for basic safety. That's what they refer to often as the reptilian brain. That is what develops first. And then as we get older, it connects with our limbic system. More and more pathways start to develop And that's where our memories are formed. That's where we hold and start making connections between our experiences over time. And then last but not least, our cognitive brain, our frontal cortex develops and connects to that. And notice how big that gap is between the limbic system and that frontal cortex in a child who has experienced trauma. It's like that. That frontal cortex is not getting those messages and not being able to provide the perspective that rational thinking allows for. And so as we talk about helping young people overcome trauma and deal with our collective challenge right now, what this looks like for all of our children, helping them navigate that is all about helping them connect those pathways in their brain. And so as I talk about those strategies, just keep that in mind. This is all about creating pathways between our reptilian brain, our trigger center, right, where we experience without thinking. That's where we first respond. And then the memories that unfolds and how we will respond from there. And then whether or not we are able to then reflect and allow for a perspective that gives us an informed process to make before we take action. That's where our ability to control our responses comes from. So the ACE study, again, for the few of you who may not be familiar with it, the ACE study was the largest study ever done to date. It was a partnership between the Center for Disease Control and Kaiser, and they studied about 17,000 individuals with a median average age of 57, over 25 states, over 15 years. And what they did was, it was simple. It was folks going to the doctor and they took this little survey with 20 questions that really asked them questions based on that list of the spectrum of childhood trauma. Did you have a parent incarcerated? Did you have a parent who had serious illness or death in the home, or a caregiver? Was there physical abuse of anyone? Were you exposed to seeing violence? Did you yourself experience emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, right? Those are what they refer to as the adverse experiences. So what they found for the first time, those angels who have been service providers forever, people who have been working with child abuse victims have known forever that there are long-term consequences, health consequences, but this study actually provided that evidence, if you will. And it is distressing at first glance, okay? The rate of heart disease, autoimmune disorders, substance abuse, victimization, polyvictimization. In other words, those who were victimized once were more likely to be victimized again, significantly so. And even early morbidity. Their actual life expectancy was less if they had 4 or more ACEs. But in California alone, our 2014 ACEs data showed that there were over 60% of Californians had experienced at least one childhood trauma. Nearly 20% had experienced 4 or more. There was already an increase in 2017, and the 2020 data won't be out for a while, right? The cost of the impact of addressing the health issues for this population is $112 billion a year. So all of that is very distressing, right? But I take heart in the fact that we are in California. We have, for the first time ever, in any state that I'm aware of, the only state Surgeon General. And she happens to be totally and completely dedicated to preventing ACEs, preventing adverse childhood experiences, and improving our systems to treat it and improving outcomes for these young people. So this is a quote from hers. I just want to strongly encourage you, if you have not heard her speak, you can look her up, but her TED Talk on ACEs is fantastic. So you can trauma, Burke, California Surgeon General. I'm not going to play it for you now, but I really am just trying to share that we have an opportunity. You know, we are literally in the midst, I'm going to go back in case you hadn't read it, in the midst of an inescapable cultural shift, right? We are all experiencing a shift. But within that, there's opportunity. There's an opportunity for caring adults who know the kinds of protective factors that we need to be ready with when we emerge. We can actually influence how we reimagine our social culture. We can actually help with the masks already. Parents, everyone who's used to being a people pleaser, right? Used to just going along with the flow. If nobody's wearing a mask, I won't wear a mask. And now this is giving a lot of people the courage to actually say, I'm not comfortable with that. No, you need to wear a mask, or putting one on themselves, even though they might be the only person social distancing and wearing that mask. When we can demonstrate setting our boundaries for our safety, that actually in and of itself is a huge, powerful lesson for our children. Of course, if we are not brave advocates for ourselves, if we have a hard time and don't find the courage to stick up for ourselves and do what we feel is safe and comfortable for us, then that is also an example for our children. So fundamentally, just as a base of knowledge, one of the most unfortunate, difficult, annoying things about the way that children learn is that they learn from example. We can talk till we are blue in the face about all of the things that they need to do to be safe, to cultivate their resiliency, to make them stronger, to give them confidence. But if we are not demonstrating those behaviors ourselves as their caregivers, as their providers, if we're not taking care of ourselves, then the message of self-care, the message of self-advocacy gets lost. The greatest hope that comes out of these ACEs study is that there has been a ton of research in the years since that is focused on what were the factors that helped all those people who didn't show those outcomes. The folks with 4 or more ACEs who didn't have polyvictimization, who didn't have heart disease, who managed somehow to come out on the other end and live a successful, satisfying, joyful existence. Let's focus on that. Let's focus on what we can do. And the cultivation of resilience, the strength building, a growth mindset has been kind of the singular focus of a lot of these studies. It's kind of the, if you will, a thread that continues across all of the results, that somehow these folks developed resilience because someone, first and foremost, Maslow's theory of hierarchy of needs, right? The first thing we need is to actually feel safe before our brain will allow us to deal with anything else, right? The first thing is safety. Someone made you feel safe. You had stability, security. You knew what you could anticipate within reason, right? Someone made you feel like you belonged to something bigger than yourself. You were able to feel yourself as not just your own experience, but part of something bigger. That is huge. You were encouraged to try hard things. You gained confidence from that increasing competency, feeling like you can accomplish that, you can do that. That's a hard one for a lot of us as parents and even providers, and certainly as teachers. So often, especially in Groundhog Days, we're now looking for a challenge, right? So if they're going to start throwing a fit, it's so easy to just let it go. But that's where they need you to believe in them, to tell them again and again, I believe in you, you can totally do this. That's all right. We have nowhere else to go, friend. Let's dig in. You can do this. They need that encouragement because they need that experience to prove to themselves that they can get to the other side. Each one of those little things can help build their confidence and their resilience to do another little hard thing. Insight, self-care, developing and practicing skills to manage the triggers. Okay, what that looks like for children, it's called social emotional learning. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But again, you can tell them to go do their breathing exercises. They're not gonna. You need to do them with them. That's the reality. Until it becomes their own habit, it has to be a guided self-care, right? It has to be a group activity. Teaching is the best way to learn for yourself, right? So there's no harm in it. It just takes up a lot of time. And finally, mental health intervention. So some of the questions that you all submitted really moved me. And I want to emphasize this point, that I am not a mental health professional. I cannot give guidance on specific treatments. If you feel that you cannot handle the behaviors of your child or a child that you are serving, do not give up searching for the resource, the provider who can, okay? They need professional help. You probably do too if you're trying to cope with it. So social emotional learning comes down to lessons, activities, very much a tactile, like experience-based learning around self-awareness. So the breathing exercise we did in the beginning, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, communication skills, all of those things combined activate the pathways in the brain that connect those different systems of thinking. And when we do that for our children, the more that they practice, it's so funny when it comes to mindfulness practice, can't tell you how often I hear somebody say, yeah, I tried sitting and meditating and it doesn't work. I'm like, I'm not sure what you think is going to magically happen with it working because it does work. You can feel it. If you actually feel your heart rate and you sit for 5 minutes counting your breath slowly, it physiologically calms your heart, physiologically calms you down. The more you do that, even if you don't like it, the more that you are becoming aware of your body and connecting and opening to those pathways. Particularly for young people, giving them opportunities to experience stillness is incredibly powerful. Boredom is not the enemy. Boredom is when we discover how creative and imaginative our minds can be. And there's beauty in that. So I'm kind of putting this in here as kind of a keyword, if you will. So at the end, you're going to get a list of resources in the follow-up email. And there are some great websites with all kinds of learning tools for different ages, from children to teens. I highly recommend you just explore it for the children that you serve. We all need to explore and continue to challenge our minds, again, because Groundhog Day has lasted a really long time and there's no love story involved. It's just a lot. So for those of you working within systems, what we know is strengthening those protective factors is everything. That is so hard when we can't actually be in person. We can't actually show support. When we launched our online programs this summer, we had children logging on hours ahead of time because their parents were at work. They were home alone. They had the schedule of classes that they were going to be doing online, and they had nothing in between for an hour or 3 hours. So they were there. They were hanging out. And then they'd ask if they could stay and talk to us afterward because they were alone. And these are not necessarily abuse victims, but this is what I'm saying is literally everyone is in a high stress situation that could lead to victimization, right? So what are those strengths? Focusing on what we can do. What are those protective factors that we can put in place? Can we get a family, a caring adult outside of the immediate household to be able to check in with this child on a regular basis? Maybe they're playing a game online on a device, but somehow giving that child opportunities of connection outside of their immediate walls. Part of the reason I'm genuinely an ACEs advocate is because I think we all need to understand our own. I think we all need to understand how our past experiences impact how we relate to others, particularly vulnerable children. And when they make us suddenly super angry, how instead of blaming that child for their behavior, which 9 times out of 10 is developmentally completely appropriate, it's about recognizing in ourselves our vulnerability based on our own experience that we need to acknowledge, that we need to let go of, so that we can be fully present with that child. Emphasizing continuity of care and collaboration. So all of this buzzword, trauma-informed, which it needs to be the norm. It really needs to be the norm. When you factor in 62% of Californians have experienced at least one, right? Then you add developmental disabilities, health crises, job loss. We are all experiencing some level of trauma. You know, right now, we just need to, nobody should have to tell you the horrible story that they're going through that they just experienced. We can just assume it at this point, right? We can just assume that we need multidisciplinary teams wrapping around those who are actually exhibiting, demonstrating the impacts of their trauma, right? It makes me crazy that I can go to Washington, D.C. and go to a conference on education over 10 years ago on trauma-informed practices in the classroom, and it is still news to the teachers we train today. We have to spread the word on what works, on what we know our most vulnerable young people need. Otherwise, the problems that we are facing, that we're all so worried about in society as we come out of this is what works. We have to be using this time to reach out to our partners, educate them on trauma-informed practices, and come up with our plans for how we will do better when we can truly use all of our resources in the present physical environment. And what we can do in the meantime, we have to get creative, but we have to leverage multidisciplinary teams to better serve young victims. Maintaining an environment that reduces that secondary traumatic stress, right? It's not enough to know, we have to practice. So fundamentally, for parents looking for what works, if you just focus on these 3 things, first and foremost, safety, trust, and collaborative decision-making when it comes to trying to help your young person go to that next level, to do that next thing that is best for them. Establishing safety, trust, and giving them that ounce of control. That's what collaborative decision making is about. It's not about, this is the rule, that's why you're going to do it, right? Having set that expectation that that's the rule, that's not good enough either. Not when you're dealing with a young person's developing brain who is stuck here in the trigger mode to defend themselves. Giving them that ounce of control over those decisions as often as possible, and being transparent is what develops trust, explaining why we're going to do something, what we can expect from that, how long it will last. All of those things are how we can better serve all of the children in our lives, all of the children in our lives. acesaware.org is a website started by the California Surgeon General, and it is primarily focused on healthcare providers, but there is an ACEs Aware initiative that is multidisciplinary across the state. And this is part of their recommendation, right? Is it new? I'm guessing not. I'm guessing you are fully aware that you should be eating right. You should be doing your mindfulness practice. You should be meditating. You should be exercising every day, making sure you sleep, surrounding yourself with those supportive relationships, reaching out and connecting and listening, and getting help if you can't do those things, right? Professional help. I like to think I'm a pretty emotionally secure human, and it is so hard. It is so hard to do what we know is best for us for some reason under this circumstance. It is extra hard. Feels like everything is harder, right? So again, if not for you, but for the children that you serve, keep trying. We know that routine helps. We know that not giving ourselves a lot of wiggle room helps us establish the routines that better serve us. And that one day when you didn't manage to do the walk, you didn't manage to, I found myself walking around with a bag of potato chips, you know, like when we have those moments, doesn't mean you throw away the whole wheel of wellness here. You got to keep trying. And one of the things that I think a lot of adults do themselves a disservice with, and the children that they're trying to help, is by pretending that you've got it all together all the time. That's not actually helpful, because nobody feels like they've got it together all the time. And when you can actually let a young person know, this is hard for me too. I'm having a bad day too. That's helpful. What are we going to do about it? I'm going to try this, and this doesn't work. I'm going to try this. Talking through your own process, what's in your toolbox, sharing with them the strategies that work for you can be huge. The breathing exercises, and I know you all have this. Y'all need vitamin D. We need to get out of the house every day, at least 15 minutes. And I'm speaking to myself as much as you, friends. It is hard, but we have to kind of schedule these times in our day to ensure that we're not on the screen from 8 to 5. And we all know that that's part of the problem, is that the regular working hours aren't even a thing. Nobody really has boundaries anymore around what time they can text you or call you about work. Give yourself some silence and let that be with your child. Let them experience silence, because we have the screens, we have the devices, we're going from one form of digital entertainment to another in a lot of homes and a lot of individuals. So we really have to be conscientious about maybe setting an alarm. There are apps, tons of apps that are on your resource list, to practice, to give yourself something else to try to break out of negative habitual routines, right? Sharing. When you share, you give the other person, whether it's a child, a friend, a loved one, you give them permission to share. Again, it's not about proving that you've got it under control. Please don't. Don't pretend that. Laugh. Help young people and everyone else not take themselves too seriously. We have a tendency to get very caught up in our own little bubble, and it makes everything that we're doing wrong amplified. It makes everything that we want that we don't have amplified. Find reasons and ways to have a good time safely in your home. Music, movement, those things create meaning. I love this quote from Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. If you haven't read The Body Keeps the Score and you work with children who have experienced trauma, please read it. When we're talking about different things that work, what really matters is, and it's why you have to be so conscious of where you are, so that you can see where the child is. If you're really in a state of response yourself, then it makes it very difficult to see what the child needs. But music, movement, repetition of movement, those things can actually create a physiological sensation of safety that can be super helpful in talking through and working through trauma. So don't underestimate that kind of the power of the physical. I decided I was going to share this with you because I have my toolbox of practices that I try, and many of them I thankfully had learned before Samantha was taken, because I don't know what I would have done without meditation and yoga if I hadn't already had a practice beforehand. But there are different ways that we can connect with our own power, with our own sense of self and our own humanness, if you will. And sometimes one path works and then the next day it doesn't work. And it's true of all of the different practices. What works this moment, the next wave, that might not be your solution. So it can be helpful to remind yourself that as a human, we have primary needs that are spiritual, emotional, physical, and mental. And so you can kind of devise a strategy, and you could do this with young people that you're trying to help. What do you like to do to connect with that bigger picture? Simple, small actions that you could actually integrate. And we're going to do one of these things. We're going to try one of these things. And so first you brainstorm your list, and then you can rotate it as needed. Which one are we going to do? Give them some power and control over how they're going to try and make it through this moment. 5 minutes of stillness, 5 minutes of meditation, creating a safe space in a home environment, a spot where anybody can go just to, essentially you're giving yourself a timeout, right? But you can call it a safe space. You can let the child decorate it. That can be hugely powerful for a child to be able to give themselves that sense of control. Messages, reaching out, kind of forcing that connection in these days is critically important. So messages of love or gratitude, we're going to write cards, we're going to send a message to grandma. Having some form of a practice of gratitude is tons of research around the power of gratitude on helping with depression in particular, but anxiety as well. Giving yourself 3 minutes to just check in with how you feel, to let yourself actually feel it, notice it, name it, say it out loud. So for yourself, this is a super powerful practice. But again, what I'm really encouraging you to do in terms of protecting children today and beyond the pandemic is to do this as a group activity with the young people in your life, because they need their toolbox full too. And they need help getting there, because it's hard for us to have any motivation and discipline to do anything. It's ridiculous to expect our children to do any more than the logging on for way too many hours to go to school. So it really needs to be as fun, as much of a break from what they're used to as possible. And again, that's actually something that quarantine is allowing for, because 5 minutes of something different is actually appealing most of the time, okay? Move, whether it's 5 minutes or 20 minutes, you wanna get to that 20 minutes. Again, tons of research, physical movement is such a powerful, powerful tool that is available to us, whatever limitations we may have. Getting into our body and feeling our body is huge in terms of reducing our stress and allowing for growth. So I like calling it playing with purpose, but challenging our mind, even if it's a video game, but going into it and saying, this is my goal, I'm going to learn, I'm going to focus on this, has been shown to, if you then, when you're done playing, reflect on what you learned, what you got stronger or better at. Again, it's about the brain connection. So going from the experience of adrenaline, I'm in this, but connecting your thought process, your rational ability to that fun thing, that adrenaline experience that a game will provide, you can do that in a way that is still actually supporting cognitive development, supporting those new pathways. And our brains continue to develop. If I didn't make that clear earlier on the brain scan, please know that those pathways develop. When we were looking at the list of resilience, somebody made me safe, somebody made me feel I was a part of something bigger. You all, anyone who is watching this, by virtue of your being here, you are that kind of somebody. You are doing that for people, whether or not you realize you are or not. You are the somebody who they can learn and grow with. So creating that safe space without judgment, just allowing yourself to be where you are, allowing the child to be where they are, allowing for the sense of discomfort. But again, if you preface this with a conversation around why, right? You don't deserve to be miserable. You deserve to be happy. What happened to you was never your fault, could never be your fault. So I want you to find ways to be able to enjoy your every moment, because that's what you deserve. So it might not be comfortable, but I want to do it for you. I'm going to try for you. How does that make you feel? What do you want to do? What sounds good to you? And I want to specifically around disclosure of not just trauma, but if you're working with a child who has experienced trauma before, they don't want to make you upset. They don't want to, nobody wants to disclose trauma. Part of our biggest challenge in trying to better protect children is essentially what I've been focusing on this whole time, right? Is we have to start here. This is the only thing we can actually control, is our personal response. But by doing that, we can help children so much more effectively. So it's not enough to give them permission to tell you if somebody's ever hurt them, or if something's really bothering them or stressing them out or making them worried. We have to ask specific questions, and we have to give it space. We have to give an opportunity for the conversation to get there. So you ask those questions, and if there's no response, okay. But now we're going to do something together. You're going to actively show your love, right? By connecting and doing something, meeting them where they are. And then the chances of that child, teen, adult opening up are much greater. But we have to give the space for that connection. We have to give it the time. Asking specifically, is it okay, for instance, if you close the door? That is a huge trigger for a lot of trauma victims, just the shutting of a door. So ask questions. If you suddenly see a child respond or shut down, disassociate, go in reverse. What just happened? What just happened? They might not know. It can be a smell, it can be a sound, it could be you picking something up quickly or dramatically, who knows? But the more that you can slow down. I know we're all very, very busy, so many things to do all the time, but the more that we can slow down and notice and give space to children's responses to circumstances and their own feelings, their own responses, that's where you have breakthroughs. That's where you can actually help them realize that they don't have to feel that way, because they're not defending feeling that way. So can we try different things? Ask them that. You're going to have a 2-page list of resources, only about just 5 or 10 that are really focused on resources for children, but each of those have lots of activities underneath them and that you can just link to and give it a go. You don't have to spend forever testing it in advance. Just ask for their permission to try different things and see what works. And then talk about what they liked, what they didn't, what they can learn from that. Specifically, when it comes to prevention, what every caring adult can do is help children create their own list of safe adults. And I'm going to talk about what that means, but who are the adults that make them feel safe? I used to, in my general, elementary school parent presentations, talk about the Disney movies. If you've ever watched a few Disney movies, you know they're always orphaned, like within 5 minutes. There's just bad things happen to the parents all the time. So children have that sense of their vulnerability in that regard, their dependency, and how that can change even without having experienced significant trauma. Who are all of those people that both you and your child trust that would be there for them? If they can't go to you for whatever reason and tell you something, who could they? Who could they talk to? So it's a powerful exercise that I recommend parents do before every school year, but the holidays are also as a debrief after the holidays, having that conversation. Who are the people that you miss most? Who do you really wish could be here? Talk about involving them in the decision-making, right? Having that conversation before you decide on what your pod is going to be this holiday. Talking with your young person and making sure that, for heaven's sakes, only people who your child feels completely safe with are going to be present. That's a good start. Agree on a code word, a word that if they are suddenly super uncomfortable and they don't want everyone else to know it, you all have a word or a phrase that makes sense, that you're not going to forget. As a caring adult, you're going to remember it immediately. They could call it, they could text it, they could say it in a group around the holiday table if somebody says something that triggers them, right? And then you know to create a diversion, an excuse, and get them out of there and help them to feel safe. Figure out what you can do to help them feel safe. Empowering children to trust their instincts, again, happens by supporting those instincts. When they have a bad feeling, instead of pushing them through it because you're going to be late, because whatever, okay, you have to trust that feeling. Let's talk that through. What do we expect to happen? What could happen? And what would your plan be if that worst thing did happen? Again, it takes time. It takes time. And I'm talking about with children, again, who don't already have trauma. But it is those real life moments that make all the difference. That's when we can demonstrate how to process something and how to respond to something. And if it is an anticipation issue, right, they don't, people are coming for the holidays, I'm going to panic. Or if they're afraid to go out, if they're afraid of being jumped or hurt, what can they do? What would their plan be? We all want to be there for these children 24/7. If we were, they wouldn't be vulnerable, right? But they'd also be completely dependent, and that's not helpful. That free will is a super powerful force in the human experience. So it's just not gonna work. It's inherently problematic. So we have to help them develop the tools to be self-advocates. And if not in the moment itself, if in anticipation, then it's a role play. Oops. That's really funny. That's my warning that I'm talking too much. So I'm coming to the end here, but finally, believe a child, give them that space, listen to them. The child victims who disclosed and were not believed, who were told to be quiet, it's a whole another level of trauma to not be acknowledged, to not have that victimization acknowledged is heartbreaking. And so when they do open up, just let you go. Don't let your response be what it's about at all. When a child opens up about traumatic experience, that is gold. It is gold, and you just have to let them be with it. And all your job is to hold space, acknowledge, and recognize that they are so strong that they are able to sit there and share with you. It's a gift. It's a hard gift, but it's a gift. So safe adults, when we have this conversation with young people, again, it's not about our rules, right? It's not about your safe adults are your mom and your dad and the police officer and teacher. No, the only person who knows who makes you feel safe is you. We've all had experiences where somebody walks in the room and all the hairs on our arms go the wrong direction, right? No, they haven't done anything. We might not have any possible rational explanation for why that person does not make us feel safe. Might be the teacher, might be a friend, a parent. They don't have to have a rational explanation of why. That's how we learn to trust our instincts. Prevention is about recognizing how we feel and responding to it instead of ignoring it. If someone is scaring or hurting you, even if they're normally your safe adult, they are not being a safe adult right now, which means you can get away and you can tell. And giving children the opportunity to come up with plans for what they could do in those situations, particularly if you are worried about one of their caregivers not being safe all the time, that can be a hugely empowering thing. You know, children will call 911 for an adult in the house who falls down, but somebody's attacking them and it doesn't even occur to them that they are the most important emergency. Going over kind of what reasonable behaviors are for the adults in a child's life. And I know that if you're a provider, if you have a child who maybe is under your care, but not your biological child, you can't control all of those variables. And it may look differently, right? But by and large, safe adults communicate with the other safe adults. They don't want to keep secrets from your other safe adults. And it's important to be clear about that. Your code word with that child is your code word. If they need another code word with another safe adult, that's fine. But it's just between you so that they have those direct lines of communication. That's how many people can we get who are trustworthy and safe for this young person so that they know wherever they are, whatever they're doing, somebody's got their back. Safe adults are people you trust in your family, your community, your school. If you don't see an adult that you know, a safe adult, we default in a public situation if they are being threatened to go to a parent with children, ideally a mom, but groups of people. You just want the more people, the better in a public situation. So online, I know we all have so much anxiety about the level of exposure that children are going through today. And it is a lot. It is a lot because not only is it school, but it's also their only social engagement. So, I mean, it was the most important thing. Devices for kids over 8, pretty much, were like the most important thing before the quarantine. And now it's like a lifeline to the world in a whole different way. So meet them where they are, right? Love is an action word, and it is about showing interest in what is important to your child, to that child. So join in, play the games, have them show you. The joke in our house is mom's FOMOing again. FOMO means fear of missing out, right? And I am. If there's a new game they're playing, I want to get on there and I want to play it. I want to see what they're doing. Show interest in what's important to them. And then it's not so hard to get them to talk about what's important to them because they know that this is a genuine interest. You like them. You are interested in what they're interested in. Let them teach you how to play. I hate video games. I really don't like them at all. But in part because even as a kid, I remember how addictive they could be, right? Addictive they could be. But if they show you how to play it, first of all, you're probably going to have fun. They will find it most entertaining because I know for myself, I'm terrible at it. And creepers in Minecraft are the scariest things. I just start freaking out, which they find hilarious. But explore together. That's why I gave you the list of resources, so that some of the time that they're online is about discovery. It doesn't all have to be about entertainment. It can be about looking at new things. With our team, we did a TED Talk a night, 15 minutes, pick a topic. Let's learn something new. And it gave us connection around something that stimulated our minds, prompted conversation. We have to kind of be diligent or conscious about making an effort for these Groundhog Days to still allow for connection so that we're not just kind of going through the fog in our own homes. Yes, we're all over it. We're all done. We wish that we could be around other people too, but don't take for granted the opportunity to connect that you have. Because that is one beautiful thing out of this situation, is that if the adults in children's lives are willing to make that effort, we have the opportunity to do so. Consider using a family profile if you're going to go online. Okay, so it's particularly for young children, just create a standard family profile that you both have access to. You can always go on it. When it comes to their new apps and the games that they're playing, have them show you. And again, it's much easier to ask them to show you the privacy settings after you've played the game, after you've seen where some vulnerabilities might be in the chat. What's this public game versus a private game? What's that? Do you ever go on that? You don't go on that, right? Having those conversations when you're engaged in play is much less threatening, right? They don't feel like you're going to shut them down because it's their greatest fear is you're going to take whatever device it is away. Learn about and follow their interests, because that's where you can see the red flags. Who do they find fascinating? What music are they listening to? And I'm not going to torture you. I would never say that you have to listen to everything they're going to listen to, but have an idea of what it is, okay? Just enough to be able to talk about it. But you have to acknowledge the benefits of communication before you start talking about all of the dangers, because they will shut you out. Friends, for one thing, can you imagine going through this 8 months without communications technology? If we couldn't call each other, text each other, play games online together, Zoom, we would all be even worse off. So there are huge benefits. but there are also problems. Now, when we think about behaviors of people who are trying to prey on children, what's interesting to me is that these are grooming, potentially grooming, we call them problematic behaviors, in person. But guess what? It's exactly the same online. It's exactly the same. People who ignore the boundaries your child sets online, that's about gaining control, right? When they ignore a no, whether it's in person or online, that's about asserting control over. Assuming a quick friendship, getting really personal really quickly, asking for details, that is a red flag. Hey, I'd like to talk to you more. Join me on this app instead, or this platform instead. Why? We can keep chatting here and the space that I know is safe. Thanks. Right? Asks you to keep secrets from your family or friends, gets angry or offended when you want to spend time with friends. Children don't know this, but that is not only the pattern of behavior that leads to isolation is about creating an environment and a vulnerability in a person to be controlled and dominated, whether that is a child molester, whether it is a human trafficker, whether they're online or in person, or grooming for a situation of domestic violence. If they are looking for someone they can control, it is about undermining the support structures that they have in place, making them feel so special, right? I need you. Where were you? It's all about how special you are because you're the only person who could possibly fill this void in my life. We just met, right? It happens fast. All of those phases come fairly quickly, but the grooming itself can go for months before an assault happens, even years. Okay, they send or request inappropriate images, videos. Having these conversations with young people is really critical because we assume so much of them. And it is not fair. It is not fair. They don't know. They can't even imagine why somebody would want to see that or send that. Like it does, right? When somebody actually hurts them, it's the same thing. We expect young victims to be able to talk in detail about a horrific experience that caused them incredible confusion, if not pain or shame, which should not be theirs ever. And yet you have grown adults who can't have an honest conversation about a consensual experience. Like we expect a lot of our young people. So laying it out and really taking the time to have a conversation, come up with a plan that makes sense for your specific family, for your specific circumstances is really critical. So creating a plan. These are some apps that are just red flags, but they represent countless new ones as of today and tomorrow again, because they are created and put out there so fast. But anything that allows for anonymity, where everybody is a stranger, that's called danger. That's where cyberbullying, hate speech, horrible stuff that you don't want your child exposed to are on the sites that allow for that kind of anonymity. Sites that have geolocation built into them. So it's about connecting with people in a 2 or 3 mile area. Definitely not. Don't really want them connecting only with people who could figure out through a geolocation very easily where your child is. Snapchat has that now. Kick, that's why it was started. It was a college campus. It's about meeting people in your immediate vicinity. I am going to, okay. Devices go to bed with the adult, okay? I used to say in the family room, I've heard too many stories of young people going out there and getting them. So I recommend that the charger is in your room so that there is no way that your child's sleep is going to be impacted by online interaction, particularly the phones, okay? They're less fond of generally the online, on the web stuff. It's the texts in the middle of the night, you know, friend in crisis, you're 9, they need to be talking to an adult, not you, right? It's about helping them establish boundaries when they are very young is super helpful. And when you have a conversation with older kids or children who have had a lot of freedom, perhaps too young, it's about that collaborative decision making. It is so important, because if you set up the conversation such that it's about, I want to be able to help you establish boundaries that help you feel safe, help you sleep, help you take care of yourself. It's not about random rules. It's really about wanting to give you boundaries that you can just blame on me. It's not about, your friends can say what they will, but you're like, I'm sorry, she's ridiculous. Like, that's part of our job as caregivers and parents, is to be the person who kind of deflects some of that discomfort of establishing personal boundaries. That's we're supposed to have the strong backbone for that part. Okay, that's how they learn it, is by us having their back as they grow. Devices belong to safe adults who may look at them, right? They don't belong to the child, they belong to the adult. So of course I can check on the settings at any given time. Of course I can look at it as needed. As we develop trust around your ability to use it, that might lessen, but having the security under security or privacy, the security settings you want on a phone, it's under privacy. You want that GPS geolocation off, okay? Otherwise, every image they're taking with that camera phone has a Google map. It's a simple click, and it geolocates where the photo was taken. So when they're taking pictures like that, when they're doing videos and then putting them on a post, you download the video and you have a geolocation. So it's really frustrating to me that people are still doing that. Privacy sharing, friends, talking about what kinds of people they follow. A lot of what children are being exposed to right now, it's adults too. We're just, if we allow ourselves to be, it's overwhelming, and there's so much negativity. So again, that's about setting those boundaries. And you can, if you start with doing it yourself, I'm going to set my sleep notifications so that I don't hear any more beeps after whatever time you're going to go to bed, right? I'm going to do that for myself because I want a good night's sleep. I don't need to be worrying 24/7. Make it easier to convince a teen that that's also a good idea for them. In closing, there is a story I always tell, and I want to make sure I have enough time for some questions. So I just want to share, this is why I do this work. So all of these forms of abuse, all of these symptoms, if you will, that a child is in need of intervention, every child goes through some of it. Too many go through way too much of it. But we all have a role in preventing it and responding appropriately to those moments where we may not know why, but they need help now. There was a family over 30 years ago, a mom, a dad, 5 children. They had 3 boys and 2 little girls. And the father was an abusive alcoholic, and particularly abusive to the boys. So one day, the oldest son in the family ran out of the house, ran to the police station, and begged them to come and help because he thought his dad was going to kill his little brothers. And so the officer responding in the report said that the boys had been badly beaten. There was mold growing on the countertops. The house was a total disaster, but the most disturbing thing was that there was a security gate on a bathroom and on that bathroom window, both of which could only be opened from the outside. It was a holding cell. The children said that they'd be locked in there sometimes for days if they misbehaved. So the officer took all 5 children out of the home. Over the course of the week, the parents kept going back to the station, begging and pleading for their children back. They promised to clean up the house and get therapy. It was a long time ago. None of you were in the system then. They returned all 5 children to the house by the end of the week. And in all of the years that those boys were going to school with bruises, broken bones, getting more and more violent toward each other and others, no one in their family, no one in the school, no neighbor, no one ever reported that those boys might be in danger of abuse. And the youngest boy in that family grew up and murdered my daughter when he was 26 years old. Nothing excuses that. But part of the reason I am passionate about the work that so many of you do, and passionate about the need to increase the function of multidisciplinary teams, is because when one agency responds, it's almost never enough. The story does not end with that one incident. There has to be follow-up, and it doesn't necessarily, and probably shouldn't always be, from the same kind of agency. From a child's perspective, looking at the response that something like that happens, and not only does one person come one day, but then this other person comes from this other day, and they have a very different approach. And then there's this other service that's coming in too. People care, right? Even if you're not able to stop the abuse, the demonstration that what happened is not okay, that it is not the child's fault, is huge, and every child deserves it. If we want to prevent crimes against children, we must prevent cruelty to children. We must be proactive about leading this movement toward trauma-informed practices in law enforcement, in treatment, in educational settings, because we all need it. We all need it. The chances of us physically seeing abuse are very small. But when you have that response, when everything in your body goes the wrong direction, we have to make the call. And that's my ask of all caring adults, that we be brave advocates for all of the children in our lives and in our community, because together we can make a huge impact. I feel like I should pause, Emma, and allow for any questions if there are some that are coming in, because I know I have more, but I can come back to it if we have time.
Yeah, we do have just a couple questions that we could get to before it ends. So let me see. We had one person that asked, what if the trauma happened in school and there just isn't anyone there that feels safe due to the trauma?
The trauma happened at school and no one at school feels safe?
I believe that's what they were saying, yeah.
Yeah, the school, then it's about really insisting on the leadership of the school to have services provided to the entire school. Post major traumas in school settings, there are whole systems in place that are supposed to flood in and create a continuity of care. But first, immediate response to that trauma for everyone, from the children to the staff. Because if something happened that impacted the sense of security for everyone, that takes professional intervention. And if you're in a parent position or a provider position, you need to go up that ladder and make some noise until everybody at that school feels safe.
Great, thank you. And actually, I'm sorry, she just clarified that it was just her daughter feeling unsafe because there was abuse from the teacher and it was mishandled by the principal.
So that is depending on the variables, as an advocate, I would insist that she never have to be around that teacher again. And you can demand an IEP, you can demand conditions around their educational setting. Children have to feel safe in order to be able to learn. It is a non-negotiable start. but we so often have to actually demand it. And that's unfortunate, but there are educational attorneys who can help with that battle if it becomes a battle, but it shouldn't be. There's not only one teacher in that grade level. There is no reason that the child should have to go there. And then it's about coming up with a plan, because even if the child knows that they don't have to be in the same classroom, they know that that person's there. So maybe it's a conversation higher up with the district about actually changing schools, but talking with the child about what could be done, what would make them feel safer is really important. And it may be a situation of baby steps, maybe we're insisting that they have an advocate with them in the classroom until they don't have to see that person ever again.
Great, thank you for answering that. And we had just one more. So if anyone has any other questions, we have just a few minutes here. You can put them either in the chat box or in the Q&A box. So the next one was, my 15-year-old son isn't speaking with me because I forbid him from attending a Thanksgiving dinner with his father, who he hasn't seen in years. I've let him know it's my job as his mom to protect him. Any suggestions on further dealing with this situation?
Oy. I think it's only a nugget of information, and how you all communicate already has a lot to do with what might work and what won't. But my first thought is that whenever somebody is in a position of feeling like they were treated unfairly, right? They were not part of a collaborative decision-making process. You made the call, it's not safe, not going to happen. Acknowledging that feels unfair, like give them that, right? I know that you should be able to make this decision. Your age, you're smart, you're strong. I disagree about this particular thing, and I really felt strongly that my first job is to keep you safe. So I felt like I had to make that decision, but I'm wondering if in the future, maybe we can go about it in a different way. So maybe next time, how can we talk about a situation like this and make it so that you are safe and I am comfortable and confident that you are safe? And just, have a conversation around how do we approach this next time to maybe start talking again. But that's really hard. I'm sorry. In the meantime, like connecting that frontal, the rational brain, the forgiveness brain, the brain that allows for perspective, connecting that to his spine is really, really important. Giving them actual tactile opportunity to slow down enough to process difficult emotions and then be able to talk about them. The adolescent brain is a wicked thing. If you just Google adolescent brain on brain science, and it's a hard few years, but you will get through this. You will get through this.
That was a great answer, Erin. Thank you. So we have just about a minute. I don't see any other questions. So if you want to do kind of some closing comments, and then I can do some closing comments.
Okay.
And if anyone has any other questions, you can feel free to email me and I can get them to Erin or figure out where to get them to get you an answer.
Absolutely. Thank you. So one of the things I've been working on is, again, about being really proactive about combating the cycle of violence, the power and control wheel. And so I came up with my cycle of joy and empowerment. And I just want to walk you through this because, again, it's about that toolkit. And it's about all of us. Friends, I have many of the closest people in my life are service providers, and your work is so hard. And I see it. I see how much it is impacting you, and we can't afford to lose you. Our children need you now, but they're really going to need you when you can actually see them, right? So it is so important. I get very emotional about it. You've got to take care of yourselves right now. You're too important. Our children need every one of us to be strong for them to get through this. So modeling some of the behaviors, talking through things that we know work, who you are in this moment is enough. Telling yourself that, telling your child that, where you are is okay, right? If you have your basic fundamental needs met, it's workable. What we are facing in this moment, we can handle it. Whatever is happening, however we feel, it's okay. Our thoughts, our feelings, they are not who we are. They are not permanent states ever. Thoughts and feelings go. And we can use those 4 pathways to help us navigate through that process faster. But we have to acknowledge and accept where we are in this moment. Until we can do that, there's no moving around, because we're just defending our position, even if it's a miserable position, right? Don't wait until after quarantine to start figuring out how you're going to be happy. Bottom line, I keep telling myself this, because yes, there are a million other things I'd rather do. Life is worth it now. You deserve joy right now. Focus on what you do have. Focus on what you can do, the ways that you are already so strong, and talk about it. Share with your child, share with the children that you're with. I see this in you. I see you're so good at this. You're so strong in this way, right? What do you like about me? What do you see strong in me? What do you see strong in your sister, your brother? Helping children start to focus on what is right instead of what is wrong is where we develop kind of a basis of respect for our individuality and our capacity as humans, and through whatever difference, right? But we've gotten very stuck in a negative dialogue in many realms right now. So I think focusing on what you can do and where you are strong, reminding yourself and reminding your loved ones and children of how much they've already been through. What's a few more months? We got this. Define those goals. So if we're going to try one new thing for 5 minutes, 15 minutes a day, let's make that a thing. And then at the end of the day, we reflect on it. With really little ones, story time is very powerful. I talked about movement, but imagination play with very young children is so important. Giving them beautiful visions before they go to bed is really helpful. Giving your older children an opportunity to debrief, even if their day felt incredibly mundane, giving them that time for connection, that space for real conversation is so, so, so important. In the months after Samantha's passing, actually, in the first months, forget about it, I was underwater. I don't know how I went from one day to the next, but when the fog lifted a little bit and I was trying to find my footing, my mantra to myself was sanity first. And I give that to you. I give that to you. We all need that to be first right now. Sometimes we got to say no. Sometimes it's too much. We cannot be all things to all people all the time. You have to be on your list of priorities somewhere. So your safety and your sanity, let those be what guide your boundaries. Demonstrate that for your children. And not only are they going to be stronger and safer now, but coming out of this pandemic, they will have practiced, right? So will you. We have to actually practice asserting ourselves. But when we're focused on just those two things, my mental health and my physical safety, beyond that, it's all workable, right? We can make it through those, anything else, but safety and sanity get to set my boundaries, and that's hard to argue with. Giving yourself time, but for that connection, but being kind about it, like just consciously reminding yourself when you hear yourself saying, oh, I didn't do this, I was going to do that, I didn't do this enough, well enough, whatever. That too is demonstrating modeling for your child. Our own negative voice is harsher than anyone else's. So really consciously practice affirming what is good and right and okay about you, and acknowledging that we're not always perfect, that we don't always make the right choice. That doesn't make us bad human beings. We get another chance. Encouraging, it's so important right now in terms of resilience, giving children an opportunity to achieve something difficult. I know it's hard, we want to rescue them, but it's so important that they learn how to overcome itty bitty hard things, age appropriate, trauma informed, right? Don't traumatize them again, but giving them little things that they can do to start to feel more in control and stronger, more able to handle what might come next. The best way to do it, just play together. I know it sounds weird, but kids want to play. We all need to laugh. We all need to have some creative time, be silly. And it's hard when we're all so stressed out, but that's what our children really need right now. They really need some just time to be with you, safe adults, and have fun. So maybe once a week, just decide you're going to do something different. You're going to go somewhere, you're going to go do something different safely away from other humans, but together a new experience, because we have control over that, right? The Groundhog Day is a lot. I loved this quote. I just read this in an email from Happily Family. It's in your list of resources. It's a lovely organization, and they have a blog, and they have trainings and lots of free resources for parents about very real world, kind of in the moment parenting issues. So this is a great quote from Man's Search for Meaning. When we're no longer able to change a situation, all of us, we are challenged to change ourselves. And that's where we are, right? You can take away everything that we're used to. One thing that no one can ever take is your free will, your choice to choose love, to choose joy, because you deserve it. And so do your children. We cannot prevent every tragedy. But I do believe that when we work together, when we take care of each other and leverage our resources and do everything we can to generate that proactive community level of support that every child deserves, then with all of us as caring adults together, we can better protect and empower every child to be a joyful child. Thank you for the work that you do every day for the children in our community, for the children in your home. Keep going, keep trying, be brave, be safe, and protect joy for yourself and for the children in your life. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Erin. There's lots of words of gratitude in the chat box for you. So on behalf of myself as well, I want to thank you for giving this truly inspiring presentation and for giving it for the whole group tonight. So thank you. I want to give just a few closing remarks. Let me see here. Just want to pull this up real quick. I just want to acknowledge our sponsors that have made this presentation possible, as well as the other presentations in this series. And then I wanted to bring up the donation page again. If you're able to, you can donate by texting, or you can use the QR code. I also included a link in the chat box, and I'll include that in the follow-up email as well. This is kind of a shared fund to support this speaker series, of which we'll have our next one on December 8th, another inspiring presenter, and then January 21st. So if you'd like to see the schedule for those, we do have it up on our website at cirinc.org, and I'll include that in the follow-up email as well. So again, thank you everyone for being on, and thank you so much, Erin, of course. And
Thank you all.
yeah, everyone.
I'm reading the chat. Thank you very much.
All right. We'll see you later. Have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you.